So that systems thinking need to be in place, right? And if you don't have that systems thinking, then you can't optimize on the automation tools that are available right now. I think that's my biggest fear. It's not going to go away immediately. I think AI has made tremendous progress in that aspect. It's just going to get even better. The scale is exponential.
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, Sierra founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 40,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Stay well and stay brave.
Good to see you.
Hey, Jeremy. Thanks for inviting me back again. It's good to be back after 3 years. I was just looking at history and I was your 176 episodes.
That's right.
You've come a long way.
400 episodes. Hopefully, I'm a better interviewer this time around. And then you're like, after this interview, you're like, oh, Jeremy has regressed. He's gotten worse as an interviewer.
No, there's one clear difference. It was all on Zoom the last time because we were all stuck at home. But I'm glad to be here with you. I think it makes for a much better conversation.
Definitely.
Forward.
So I think what's happened since the past 3 years at a time was the tech talent wars. And now it feels like the tech talent winter plus concerns of the AI apocalypse on talent, which is a big difference over those 3 years, right? Because 2022, everybody felt like there's so much competition for jobs and for talent.
I call it hiring at that time.
What was it like?
Yeah, I feel missing out hiring. We've got to act fast. If there is a good talent, let's just bring it on. It doesn't matter if there is a job or not, we'll create a job. So we have the funding anyway, and the talents have multiple options, right? Then, as I say this, it seems so far away, those times. Although it's been just 2.5 years, it seems very far away because things turned, right? Even a few months after we spoke, things went completely about turn when Gojek, Facebook made their first layoffs and it started a whole spiral downwards.
Yeah.
But I don't think we're here to talk too much about that.
I think we should talk about it because it's like a before and after. We talk about the future and what we think are the jobs of 2035, right? But I think what were the learnings between 2022 where interest rates were low, there's a lot of funding, people were hiring super aggressively versus today, which feels like, people are very scared for the jobs, where the AI will replace them, companies are laying off because they're just digitizing and becoming more productive. And of course, Southeast Asia, the macro tech environment is winter right now. So I'm just kind of curious when you reflect on these 3 years, any lessons or insights you got? Anything you change your mind on?
Yeah, so let's start from the employer side, then we'll talk about the talents. On the employer side, I think one thing that has changed is become intentional. Back in mid-2022 and between 2021 to middle of 2022, there wasn't much thought that went into hiring, right? The question is, I just need to hire 20 people in this team. And there wasn't much analysis about what exactly is the scope of this person, what exactly will this person deliver for me, what will the compensation, how does it hit my bottom line? What we call in, I guess, corporate HR speak will be manpower planning, strategic talent planning. But I think now people have gotten a lot more intentional. When you are resource strapped, you become more intentional. You start looking at JDs properly. You start looking at, okay, what would the job scope be? You start indexing against outcomes. Like, what will this person deliver? What difference will this person make to my company or to the results I'm hoping to? So it's more intentional. Of course, the negative way of putting it is that it's a bit more cautious. But it should be that way. So I think that's one thing I noticed on the employer side. On the employee side, it is kind of like one learning. We will get talent who ghost us, they don't reply, you set up an interview and they don't turn up because there are many options, right? So now I think one flip is that they will engage with you. Even if they have to say no, they will at least politely decline. Or they would say, I'm not looking out, but let's have a chat because they want to build a relationship with you. They know that you're going to help them in the future. So I think if you ask me to sum it up, that's the difference I see between the employer and the employee in terms of what has happened in the last.
And I want to ask, it's a bit of a mix of professional and personal, but How have you personally changed as somebody who is in the talent space over the past 3 years? What have you had to adjust or change your mind on, or acknowledge that you were wrong, or had to update your internal OS?
I've always been a very open person.
Yeah.
I get very excited about new stuff. The change for me wasn't like, oh, I used to be a skeptic and now I'm a believer. The change for me is like, oh wow, something that I thought was real, which wasn't believed by people then, is now becoming more, I would say, it hasn't reached mainstream yet, but it's become accepted.
Yep.
Right? I'll give you an example. Fractional and contract talent or freelance talent. I used to call it the buy, build, borrow model, taught to me by one of my consultants who's a HR expert for many years. So when I preached the borrow to people around me, whether they are startup founders or VCs, buy is very simple. It's like you hire your full-time employees. Build meaning that you hire fresh grads or inexperienced talent and build them up. And borrow, it's a fractional piece, right? Where you bring in expertise on demand for a specific outcome, but they may not be part of your full-time bench.
Right.
People will be skeptical about it. Like, why would I bring in someone like that? They'll question their commitment. But I think what has changed in the last 2 years is because of cost pressures and the need to be flexible due to changes, this has become more accepted. So you will see that the word fractional is being used a lot more now. In fact, there was a LinkedIn report, or it was Harvard Business Review, which said that LinkedIn used to have 2,000 profiles with the word fractional. Guess that number?
No idea.
120,000.
Wow.
Yeah, I'll need to get that exact number. But it's that level of multiplier in 2 years, right? So I think that's one thing that I think if I reflect back would have been one of the bigger changes. I had interest in that and I believed in that. And now I'm very happy that it's become more mainstream. So that answers your question.
Gotcha.
I don't want to sound like I'm some like Yoda. I guess it's something that I always believed in, which was the right model, especially for growing startups, right? Yeah, I think that's one. But there are a few other things I realized as well.
Yeah.
Cross-border hiring and
Right.
COVID accelerated it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about cost and flexibility.
Right.
Recently, I accepted a new project.
Yeah.
I was very surprised. A US SaaS company. They built their sales and customer success team in Malaysia, a big team.
Right.
And they came to us to help us look for someone to shepherd this
Right.
team of 30 to 40 individuals. When I spoke to candidates, the first thing they said, oh, this is really smart. Because they're doing very well.
Right.
There's no need to spend on of talent
Right.
if I can find an equal level and quality of cost in another country.
Right.
And in this case, they chose Malaysia.
Right. Let's talk about that. The geographic mix has changed quite a lot over the past 3 years. People were very focused, for example, on Indonesia for hiring, because I think Indonesia is 200 million people. There's a big growth story. And now I think when winter on the Indonesia funding landscape, hiring is very flat. I would say that Malaysia has gone up over the past 3 years in terms of technology hiring.
Yeah.
Singapore is neutral.
I think among all the Southeast Asian countries, it's a known fact, that Singapore has the best talent, highest quality talent, global mindset, good education, attitude towards work and everything else. Singapore, I think we all know it. It's the cost.
Yeah.
Right? It's the cost. Junior talent. Because our junior talent costs the same as a mid-level or senior talent in our neighboring countries, right? But I think now Singapore has that advantage because we may not necessarily need so many of those junior talent anymore with automation.
Yeah.
I'm a bit more optimistic about Singapore in that sense.
Yeah.
To Indonesia is fairly tough because the unicorns had overpaid. I think we know it. So if you talk to people like 2 years ago, why do they want to join startup? It's because their pay could be tripled.
Yep.
Compared to, say, other countries, particularly Singapore, like if you join startup, the immediate perception is that I'll get a pay cut in exchange for equity. But Indonesia was the other way. The unicorns, particularly flush with funding, overpaid. Now they are the first to lay off. And these people are caught in a difficult predicament because they have already achieved a certain salary scale. And it is just unusual and abnormal to say, okay, I'll go back down to half.
It's difficult.
It's difficult. We know that's the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Indonesia has many different challenges when it comes to talent.
Yeah.
I would say the other thing is because talent is scarce in Indonesia, so even your average talent got paid above average salaries. And now when things are equilibrated, where do these average talent go? Because they may not deserve that above average or top premium salary.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm hoping to be as neutral as possible
Yeah, of course.
and real as possible, but this is what we're seeing on the ground.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. I remember that during the pandemic time period, 2020 to 2022, for me, when I was looking at the Harvard alumni, a lot of Southeast Asians coming back to Southeast Asia, right?
Yeah.
And so we saw that a lot of the Indonesian folks during that time were all going back to Indonesia to build businesses because they're excited to build startups. I can tell you right now that, 2024, 2025, totally different. Like most of them are saying, okay, I want to stay in the US for longer, or if I want to be an employee in Singapore and held out opportunities in Indonesia over time, get to see my parents. Or if they go back to Indonesia, it will be because they have a family business expected to take over because these are tough times. They need to start taking over and ramping it up. But there isn't that piece where they were going to go straight into Indonesia tech sector.
Correct. Go back to traditional SME businesses.
Yeah.
Right? Profitable from the word go, whatever business it is, because Indonesia is there's still a lot of opportunities in traditional industries. Not the sexiest of industries, but fundamentally sound, right? There's no issue. There's no need to chase PMF. It's growth from the word go because you know you have PMF.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
It may not be 100x.
Yeah.
It may not be $1 billion business, but it makes for more than enough to make you in the top 10% of income brackets.
Yeah, and of course, the problem is that everybody's setting up an F&B now because there's a lot of VCs and private equity
Going into
F&B because they can't put the money into startups, so now they're putting the money into F&B, the middle class, affordable, premium, luxury goods. So
in Indonesia.
Exactly like pachongkai, chicken fried in prawn paste.
What's that?
There's also like halal beef rice bowls because sushi is Japanese but also doesn't have the local flavor.
Fundamentally, it can be tech enabled.
Yeah.
It can be automated.
I think a lot of Indonesian talent is focusing on now is what's that middle class, like you said, tech-enabled business. Of course, the tricky part is, do you have enough capital to set up from scratch? And because the VCs have kind of frozen in Indonesia, obviously they're still deploying. For those who are doing it, they're still building. The other group are those who are second generation, third generation from the SMEs. They are going back to tech because they're getting competed by these groups. So let's put Indonesia to one side.
Yeah.
And obviously, I think the other three markets is kind of like Malaysia, Vietnam, and Philippines. What do you think about these markets?
Malaysia has a lot of potential because talent-wise, most of them speak 3 languages.
Right.
English and Chinese. So that's one strength that they have. I think the quality education, quality of talent, a lot of them get sent overseas as well. Local education is pretty good, both private and public. I think Malaysia has a lot of potential because of that. Cost of talent is still reasonable. Of course, it's not comparable to, say, Indonesia, Philippines, or Vietnam yet. But if you look at the balance of quality, Malaysia is in a pretty good spot.
I think it's a sweet spot for sure because they have good infrastructure in terms of internet. It doesn't go down like the Philippines.
Yeah.
And then I think obviously they speak English.
The 3 languages. So I have got American SaaS companies building teams there.
Yeah.
We've got Chinese companies.
There as well.
I've got Chinese companies telling me I'm building my team in Malaysia.
Yeah.
The only reason, language, right? The bridge between internal, language is very important. Not externally, internally, culture, in sync. So language, and then of course English being the international language all around, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I think Malaysia has a pretty sweet spot.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And, that's a fair point as well because I think a lot of people in Singapore have lost their ability to speak Mandarin fluently.
I'm born Malaysian, so I have a slight bias towards Malaysia, but I grew up most of my years in Singapore. Singapore gave me a scholarship and I've been here for decades, right? So I think that's my assessment of Malaysia, if you ask me. On the other countries, just my point of view, I may not have the deepest understanding. Vietnam, in terms of talent, probably stands out because they have really good attitude.
Right.
They're hungry.
Yeah.
They work hard. They're smart. Perhaps if the level of English can match up, that could be the priority.
Yeah.
They would be a force to be reckoned.
I agree.
To be reckoned with.
I 100% agree. I think Vietnam, the biggest handicap is English.
VCs, PEs are going into Vietnam in education.
Right.
I don't have data, but that's obviously a huge growth sector for many investors. That motivation and the availability of English lesson or whatever it is, that's going to be the bridge. Because firstly, you're motivated. And secondly, if it's available and if it's English, then it's probably easily bridged with language tools online, particularly AI language tools. It's so many options right now. I think that would be something that could be bridgeable in 5 years.
Yeah. I would say the Vietnamese is benefiting a lot from the China plus one. A lot of the Chinese companies are moving to Vietnam because they feel quite comfortable nearby, at least on the e-commerce.
Of course, there were other considerations. to international trade. You know,
It's not controversial to say that.
came in and said, if you remember a week ago, we said, hey, Jeremy, we should talk about tariffs and talent. But every preparation that I made to do with tariff and talent is just kind of like, you just put it on a pause because things are so uncertain right now, right?
I'm uncertain, but I think the direction of change is clear. I don't know how to drive from here to Bangkok, but the direction is roughly there. I think US doesn't like the trading relationship with China. It's asymmetrical, and so it's going to erect trade barriers. There's going to be taxes or tariffs on Chinese goods moving to America, right?
Yeah.
That incentivizes Chinese companies to move to Vietnam or Cambodia. Basically, they're becoming like every other multinational corporation, right? You know, like Americans were the first to become multinational corporations. The Koreans became multinational corporations. The Japanese also became multinational corporations after the Plaza Accord when they had a trade dispute with America. So all these Chinese companies are all becoming, learning how to have multiple offices.
I think if you ask me the last 2 years, one of the biggest change for me is the requests from Chinese companies requesting for our help to find international talent based in Singapore, Malaysia, different parts of Southeast Asia.
I think that's the biggest difference because if you ask me before 2021, I'll say 2000 to 2020, the 20-year period, I think by then this upswing in China was very strong. So the point of view was like, okay, if you want to work for a Chinese company, go to China, there's money to be made, tech boom, and then set up, if you're a sea turtle, go back to China. But there was never this idea of, okay, I'll work for a Chinese company in Singapore, Korea, or Vietnam. It's like, why do that when you can be in Shenzhen or Hong Kong?
Because it was much more domestic. The domestic market was huge enough. But China had some challenges in recent years. And so they've become more international. And because of that, they have to set up companies outside of China and then hire outside of China as well.
Exactly.
And Singapore has that advantage because of language.
No
matter how bad your Chinese is, you can still pick it up because you have the fundamentals.
Right?
I
have been improving because I've been coaching my 4-year-old and 2-year-old girls to be bilingual. I'm learning with them.
My Chinese is now 10 times better. Because having to talk to...
And then I think the last country in this list is probably Philippines.
Philippines used to be the hub for business outsourcing, right?
Correct.
Customer service teams, back end. It's going to be because of their proficiency in English. My only fear is automation. I refer to AI, driver of automation. So I think my only fear would be automation.
I think so too. The crux of it is, do you have the other skills beyond English? At that time, it was very much like, okay, you have English, you have an SOP, therefore they outsource this customer service call to you. People are building this 1,000 center call center. So it was this, and now you have AI and it's getting really good speaking English. They sound less robotic
because of machine
learning. So they feel more personal. And the order of magnitude of difference is just night and day between 3 years ago and today.
Yes.
And so it just keeps improving. So I think the issue is the underinvestment from my perspective into like, maybe call it science or math, education. When I've been evaluating talent, for example, I've been seeing like Vietnamese engineers who are very, very good. And they're using AI to improve their English. Versus a Filipino person who's good at English but can't do the work deeply. Suddenly it's no longer Filipino versus Vietnamese talent.
It's systems thinking, actually. So that systems thinking need to be in place, right? And if you don't have that systems thinking, then you can't optimize on the automation tools that are available right now. I think that's my biggest fear. It's not going to go away immediately. I think AI has made tremendous progress in that aspect. It's just going to get even better. The scale is exponential, the improvement. So I think that's going to be my biggest fear. I mean, of course, there's still that top percentage of leadership talent, senior talent that's going to be needed. But if you talk about broad base, that's where my understanding is.
And I think this is actually a good timing because now we have this landscape of it. I guess one more question I have, more specifically before we turn to kind of AI and jobs of the future, is what do you think about this Johor Singapore special economic zone? Are you optimistic about it? Are you bearish about it? Because I'm hearing like some mixed views about it. So I'm just kind of curious, what do you think about that?
Honestly, I don't have much of an opinion about it now. In my day-to-day conversations, I don't hear the people I talk to really thinking that it's going to be a big advantage for me. I guess the only thing is that maybe availability of talent or less barriers to talent, particularly in the traditional sectors where you need sort of service talent or blue-collar workers, so to speak. Singapore does not have enough of. and have been hiring people from Malaysia, and there have been barriers to the movement. So maybe that barrier would be removed. It's already something that's happening. Right. So maybe just some removal of barrier in a way. It's just removing those barriers. It will benefit, and I think it's on top of what the parliament has been talking about in terms of removing barriers, Ocean and Cambodian talent. I think it's more a combination rather than a standalone.
I think a special economic zone in Johor, obviously, it's a codification. Obviously, we know that Malaysians and Singapore was one country under the British and then also together. So I don't think people are very different in terms of that. But I think there is, like you said, cost of living, big difference. Labor arbitrage of wage is much higher than the actual competency difference, if any. So I think the special economic zone is an interesting piece. I've been to the network school by Balaji. See that really aggressively pushing and saying like, hey, this is a great place for us to access Singapore nearby with a low cost of living.
The other thing that I see would be Singaporeans or people residing in Singapore moving there. There are already people moving to Johor as their base, but operating businesses across the world, including Singapore. So maybe it might just make those decisions easier because there's less barriers. I think the effects are not yet obvious.
I think we'll see. Singapore's building the MRT train between Singapore and Johor. I was talking to some retailers and they're pretty worried about it. From your perspective, Singapore is like, hey, on Saturday, I have some friends who already do this. They drive to Malaysia, buy all the groceries in Johor and then drive back. So and they'll just make it, open to everybody who doesn't. I think it's interesting.
I would see that, although it hasn't really come out as a big pain point for our retailers. I mean, they're still growing and things like that.
The train hasn't been built yet. I think people are already saying that when it happens, I think they expect to see this behavior. We'll see when it happens.
Controversial.
Do you believe that Singaporeans would travel across the border on an MRT to buy cheaper groceries? I mean, to me, it's like
if you look at Europe,
it's normal. It happens all the time.
The Swiss would cross over to Germany in an hour, pick up groceries and come back. So I think it's just the way it is. And the retailers here will just have to constantly think of innovation, differentiation, improve the experience.
Fight e-commerce and then fight this.
And then you will be targeting sophisticated customers or consumers here. The sugar and everything else, like your staples, might end up being from Malaysia, right? The supermarkets here will transform into a place of experience. It's going to be that, which is what FairPrice has been doing. If you walk into a FairPrice right now, it's a place of experience. It's not just picking up staples.
I always remember there was this experience where I had to buy a shoe brush and shoe polish. I walked into the supermarket and they were like, we haven't stocked a shoe brush and shoe polish for 5 or 6 years. Obviously, I don't buy a shoe brush that often. But for them, it was just like, please buy it online.
I know.
I need to brush my shoes.
You talk about it, crossing over to Malaysia to buy something that's cheap. It's just like going to Shopee or Taobao, buying stuff. It bypasses our local retailers. Consumers are happy. So if you think about it, it's just the opening of the economy, right? Like,
we'll see.
Everyone would have to figure out what their distinct advantage is a user's needs.
Speaking about advantage, you were mentioning that you think that the jobs of 2035 are going to be so different from jobs of 2025. And I think we are already kind of seeing that, right? There are people today whose jobs are getting impacted by AI. If you said, my dream was to become a call service center worker or to be a content marketer, writing copy, I think we really see a lot of those jobs kind of like really disappearing already. So fresh graduates are going through a problem, and I think in Singapore, for example, there's already higher than normal amount of people who are unable to get jobs upon graduation, because I think they just got dislocated, right? Like AI change happened very quickly. They were already on a path to do marketing, and then there's no more marketing job. Accounting is becoming more efficient and everything. So as all the companies become more efficient, then there's less entry-level jobs for them to enter. So I think there's already seeing some signs of distress there. I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are.
I think companies, I don't think they have blatantly said that we're not hiring that many because of AI, but I think they're just being cautious. So, for example, Shopify's CEO a few days ago said if an employee leaves, there is no mandate to replace an employee unless you showed me that you have explored AI. Have you explored AI? Can an AI replace the work that's being done by this employee? I think it's that kind of mindset that's happening already among employees. The actual number of jobs being lost, we don't know. That's just a prediction. I think the prediction is something like 40% by one of the international bodies. So if you ask me the impact, I would say that as a fresh related to a fresh grad or anyone in a career right now, I think the key thing is to look at what are the skills, and it's hard to predict because AI is moving at such a quick pace, but we sort of roughly know what kind of ability AI has. How does it impact the skills of the future? That will be the first thing I'll look at, right? We know that AI started with language, the power of language. A year ago, we all said they're not analytically great, scripts are wrong, the things they're spitting out on numbers are wrong. So we said, okay, on a language front, and so that affected the content marketers, people who write, and that all forms of content, right? But a year later now, AI is super powerful in terms of their analytical. They can write scripts for you, their databases are, when a year ago it wasn't accurate. Now we're going, oh my gosh, analytic skills are going to go. And of course, alongside that, the coding is becoming more accurate. So I think as a fresh grad, we just have to be on top, number one, of what kind of skill AI would possess and how that skill will then, you can extrapolate it to replace or reduce the need for human to have that skill.
Yeah.
Right? It's the way I look at it. To sum it all, if you ask my opinion, what skills would the current fresh grads or job seekers or talent need? Soft skills will be less replaceable by AI. Soft skills meaning communication skills, how you conduct yourself, how you collaborate with people.
Right.
Those are soft skills. In the last few years, it's always been brought up as something that one should prioritize more than hard skills. But now I think even more so.
But let's take the contrarian view, right?
Yeah.
Because soft skills like communicating well,
Yeah.
collaborating well, AI can be very collaborative,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
When I talk to my AI agent, like, what a great idea, Jeremy. Let's get to it. So it was always
Okay.
perfectly collaborative with me.
Let's double click on that. You see, so you see, the AI is always optimistic. It's always positive because at one point we were going, oh wow, the AI is being a bit too rude and not right. So then I guess the people behind it structured it to be super encouraging. The AI is not criticizing you. Whereas I think that's where the human EQ comes in. We need to have constructive feedback, constructive criticism, right? And when there's a need to be encouraging, we are encouraging. And I think that's where AI is not. Sometimes you feel that the guy is over optimistic all the time because it can only be programmed to be such. I don't know. Maybe one day it will be so intuitive that it will have that human balance.
I mean, okay, fine, I'm being, criticism with you, but I feel like I'll just go to my agents like, please be less nice and please be constructive and thoughtful in business English. And then you can tune your AI one way.
Yeah, it could. But in general, I think the AI, if you look at the job, soft skills will be important.
Right.
So for example, your executive presence, the way you communicate, the way you are able to collaborate with someone.
I would say in-person is a big thing because we're not going to see in-person robots.
Yeah,
Yes.
right. Even then, it will not have the same between me and you, right? If not, why are you inviting me for an in-person interview? I might just do it online, right?
Maybe it's not me. This is actually the most advanced AI robot who's based on Jeremy's mannerisms and body language.
I think that's so soft skills. The other thing is really be on top of AI.
Yeah.
There's no one in this world today that should not say, I have used any form of AI at all.
Right.
To be on top of AI, to know what's happening, to experiment with it. Like we were talking about earlier, 20 years ago, it's Microsoft Word. You better know Microsoft Word, right? You don't get a job, right? 10 years ago, it's you better be digital. What does digital mean? Maybe you have some apps on your phone, you're using some software beyond Microsoft Word to help you with you're using Google, maybe, things like 10 years ago. And now it's like, it's embedded. We need to be on top of AI. Think about it as your little competitor. If you're on top of it and you know what your competitor is doing, then you'll always be one step of your competitor. Right?
Yeah.
So you think of AI. So if you think of AI replacing your jobs, then AI is my competitor. Then I better be 1 mile in front of my competitor. Start now. I can't predict exactly what jobs will be replaced at what rate. Right now we can only guess on some ends, but the safest net for anyone in the job market right now is to be on top, which means to use AI, join communities, learn together, whatever you want to do.
I agree with you. I think the way I think about it is like 20 years ago, everybody that was in the know was learning Microsoft Word. If you didn't learn Microsoft Word, you probably don't have a white collar job. You just have to use email. And 10 years ago, people had to start learning how to use digital apps,
Yep.
Salesforce, HubSpot,
Yep.
but some kind of CRM or process embedded in the system.
Yep.
People were starting to learn that. And if you don't learn how to do any of those systems, I think your jobs are getting cut today. Because if you don't know how to digitize your system and you're doing everything through Microsoft, which was technology 20 years ago, it's going to go bye-bye, right? And so I think today's technology that I think you have to be on top of
The
it.
cliche is one has to be a voracious learner.
I don't be a
know.
bullish. I just want to relax. I know how to do Google Slides already. I already know how to do Google Docs. I already know how to use Slack.
I get worried for people because the race is like before you can even run to the 50 meters, I trained 10 years to hit this 3-hour mark for marathon. And now I've not trained for 2.5 hours. It's tiring. And that's why I feel be part of a community of learners.
Yeah.
I think that's essential because we have to help each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to learn all on your own. When we're in school, we have classmates, we have teachers and all that. Now you rely on each other to learn.
So tiring. Like I said, the marathon is a good example. And then
No, but really, if you talk about jobs of the future, securing your job, if you talk about the impact of AI, which is real, then it's got to be this.
you mentioned skills of the future and markets of the future, as well as professions.
Okay, so I have this model that I've been using to guide people in terms of thinking about their careers. It's like a Venn diagram. Think about it. Circle on top, skills of the future, markets of the future. And then the third circle, industry of the future. So whenever you think about, okay, which job should I take? Should I leave this job for the next job? You just evaluate all these three to help you make sense of whether you should leave or not. Of course, there are other considerations like toxic environments, culture, bad boss and all that, but I'm not going to even talk about that, right? I'll talk about the more practical database considerations. I'll look at all these three when evaluating your job. So as you ask me, what kind of skills is needed? Then I'll look at the skill quadrant. If I look at the skill quadrant, what kind of skills would be needed in the future? It helps you think about it because the information is all out there. If you have this mental model, it helps you put better use or more efficient research to arrive at a conclusion.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What's the market of the future and what's the industry?
Yeah. So I think markets of the future, the way I look at it is which market is a growth market. So I was speaking to this Canadian gentleman who moved to China 20 years ago. Not just him, but another colleague as well. At that time, they saw that China had the growth potential. China was the market of the future. Not many would have seen it because not many would have taken the risk to relocate themselves from Canada to China, but this person saw it because he believed that was the market of the future and it got been backed by research. Because of that move, he's now able to retire at 40 because he made some good moves and set up a company, right? You know, or join various other companies. So I think that's kind of what I meant. Maybe 10 years ago, you would say, oh, maybe Indonesia, right? So if you entered Indonesia early and you are in the right business, you would have reaped the benefits of this really fast growing economy.
Right.
For someone today, I do not want to be too judgmental. I think you need to see for yourself which market you think could be growing. And it depends on your interests. I would say if I'm a Singaporean, I would look at Vietnam. If you dare, a bigger risk will become companies like Cambodia. There are businesses doing very well in Cambodia in certain areas, right? Like fintech, financial inclusion and things like that. So those could be potential markets of the future. But if you don't go there, you don't know, right? So I think some people say, okay, perhaps US is still potentially a growth market. So maybe you might want to consider the US, right? So I would say for any person, you've got to do your research and figure out, okay, like which markets do I see has that potential for me, right? And then perhaps either I move to that market or I find a job that gives me exposure to that market.
Okay, I wrote down Vietnam and Cambodia.
No, seriously, they could be markets of the future as well because they're growth markets, right?
So I think Vietnam looks better and better. So I'd say like 10 years ago, I think if you say Vietnam, I think people have been a big question mark.
Yeah.
But I think with the China Plus One strategy, with the Trump's first administration and the anti-China policy, Chinese people moving to Vietnam, I think there definitely is a sense of Chinese capitals flowing in, American capitals also flowing in, Singaporean capitals flowing to Vietnam.
Don't underestimate some of the other countries. I've been to Laos 2 times this year. The amount of development, coffee plantations, durian plantations, avocados, turning into avocado oil. I think what I'm trying to say is don't be too comfortable in where you are right now. If there's an opportunity to have an exposure to that market,
Right.
doesn't mean you need to relocate, but
Yeah.
maybe it could be a job exposure to that
Yeah.
market. That market has potential.
Yeah.
I think that's one. And then the third part of my model will be the industries of the future. So what are potential industries of the future? I think everyone talks about, of course, AI is indisputable.
Better to serve the master.
So if you have an opportunity to do anything in AI or be exposed to anything in AI, please go there. Maybe 3 years ago, it was crypto. Like I ran a crypto community for many years. Somebody who is in a more traditional tech industry, startup, as well, told me, guess what? And he's a coachee of mine. After deliberating, I've decided to take up this role in crypto. And I said, good for you, right? Because it's potentially an industry, no matter how controversial it is,
Right.
it's an industry of the future.
Right.
And then, of course, all this thing about clean tech, energy, renewable energies, and everything, the whole bucket in sustainability is the industry of the future too.
Right. Controversial.
But
Not controversial, but
yeah.
But I gotta ask you, if these are the markets of the future, what would you say are the ones that you would not recommend? But which markets or which industries would you say like, hey, if I was your mentor, and then you'll be like, between two jobs of two different things, I wouldn't recommend this.
Get assassinated by people in those industries.
Yeah.
I hope this is a neutral answer. If you are a growth-minded person and you're
Yeah.
ambitious and you want to be the top 1% of your all the
Yeah.
time, go for those industries that I talked about.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because there was this particular coachee who is not a risk taker,
Yeah.
very happy to have a steady income, not unstable,
Yeah.
get destabilized,
Yeah.
right? And go for mainstream industries that have proven themselves.
Right.
For example, in tech, it will be e-commerce, right? E-commerce 5-10 years ago was the industry of the future,
Right.
right? When Amazon started was 20 years ago, industry of the future, but now it's mainstream.
Yeah.
So go into that because you may not grow as fast,
Right.
but you may not lose your job so easily if you're in the
Correct.
right job within the sector. FMCG. I came from FMG for 15 years. None of the recessions had any impact on us.
Yeah.
We sold more. We sold more shampoos and more diapers. So there's a difference between growth industries or in what I call industry of the future, and they're going to be around, but they are more stable.
Right.
Right? As an individual, you need to recognize your own. If you're ambitious and you want to grow fast, and not everybody is there, and doesn't mean that you're any worse. It's just your own preference.
Great. On that note, thank you so much for sharing. I thought it was interesting to hear the learnings and observe differences between our own personal behaviors as well as the behaviors of employers. Secondly, thanks for sharing the landscape view of all of the countries in Southeast Asia, from Singapore to Philippines, Indonesia to Vietnam, Malaysia.
The land of good food.
Give you a 30 seconds point of view on Thailand talent.
Thailand hasn't changed much. It
It's a
hasn't.
mature market, it feels like.
Yeah, it hasn't changed much. There hasn't been too much development. Even there aren't that many startups coming from there.
Yeah.
VCs are not quite investing
Yeah.
there. Traditional businesses, tourism,
Yeah.
and all that could be good for them. That means they're in a good space, right?
Yeah. Okay, so there's that. And then the last part, thanks for sharing about what you think are the jobs over the next decade from 2025 to 2035. It'll be interesting because when we are still around 2035, we can record a follow-up episode. Be like, so did this come true? Soft skills, an important thing. Should users become a super genius data analysis? I'm just saying, it's very long.
I won't be in my tone.
Our AI versions will be very good looking, no wrinkles, recapping the episode.
Exactly. You wouldn't even tell it's 10 years later.
Okay.
AI would have changed my face.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Good to be here. Great chat as always.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.